Title: I was paid to watch a house that reappears every night. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins that he thought it was an easy night job. Stand outside, watch a house, get paid. But the house did not exist during the day, and every night it returned closer, older, and wrong. What he witnessed over 7 nights was never reported, never investigated, and never forgotten. This is the true account of a man paid to watch a house that should not exist. The listing appeared on a local job board at exactly 11:58 p.m., sandwiched between warehouse shifts and overnight janitorial work. It offered cash payment, no interview, no references, and one instruction: observe the property from dusk until dawn and report abnormalities. The pay was generous enough to silence doubt, and the wording was strange enough to make the job feel temporary, almost unreal. The man who accepted it did not know that unreality was the point. He arrived at the address the following evening before sunset. The location sat at the edge of a suburban development that had stalled years earlier, where paved roads dissolved into packed dirt and streetlights ended without warning. The address led to an empty lot. No foundation, no driveway, no mailbox. Only waist-high grass flattened in a rough rectangle, as if something heavy had been placed there repeatedly and then removed. The air smelled faintly of damp wood, though no wood was visible. A white envelope lay pinned to a splintered post near the curb. Inside was a single page typed in block letters. It stated that payment would be transferred after each completed night and that observation was the only requirement. It warned against entering the property, photographing it, or speaking about it. It did not explain why. At the bottom, a final line read that the house would arrive after dark. He waited. As the sun sank, the temperature dropped in a way that felt unnatural, fast, and localized. The grass rippled as if brushed by passing bodies. Then, without sound or motion, the house was simply there. One moment the lot was empty. The next, a narrow 2-story structure stood where the grass had been flattened, its presence so abrupt that it made the eyes ache to process it. The house looked old but undecayed, preserved in a state of long neglect without collapse. Its paint was a gray so pale it seemed leached of color, peeling in thin, curling strips that never quite detached. The windows were tall and narrow, their glass uneven, catching the last light of dusk in warped reflections. No lights were on inside. No curtains moved. The front door faced the street with a patient, closed-mouthed stare. He stood across the road and watched. As night deepened, details emerged that daylight might have revealed as flaws. The house did not cast shadows correctly. Its edges appeared slightly blurred, as if the air around it were thicker. When he shifted his weight, the angle of the roofline seemed to change, subtly correcting itself as if aligning to him rather than the street. Nothing else happened that first night. No movement. No sound. At dawn, the house did not fade or retreat. It vanished. One moment it stood complete and solid. The next, the lot was empty again, the grass pressed flat into the same rectangular scar. The air warmed immediately as if released from a held breath. Payment arrived minutes later. The second night, the house returned earlier. The man arrived before sunset and noticed new details in the lot. Deeper impressions in the soil, like footprints too large and heavy to be human, overlapping in confused patterns. When darkness fell, the house appeared again, but closer to the road by several feet. The change was subtle, measurable only by the distance between the front steps and the curb, but it was real. The windows were different. One on the second floor was open a fraction, its frame bowed outward. The glass reflected something that was not the street, not the sky, but a dull interior glow that did not illuminate. When clouds passed over the moon, the house seemed to swell slightly, then settle back, like a lung filling and emptying. He wrote down what he saw, careful to keep his notes factual. The instructions had said to report abnormalities, not interpretations. At dawn, the house vanished again, leaving the same flattened grass and a new smell, faintly metallic, that clung to the air long after the sun rose. The third night, the house arrived before full dark. The man felt it before he saw it, a pressure behind the eyes, a low awareness that something had occupied space it should not. The structure now stood at the edge of the sidewalk. Its front door was no longer centered. It leaned slightly as if recently used, and faint marks marred the paint around the handle, smudges darker than dirt. The windows were no longer uniformly dark. A single room on the ground floor held a dim presence, not light, but the suggestion of activity, as if the air itself had been disturbed and not yet settled. The man noticed that when he looked away and back again, the interior arrangement behind the windows changed. Walls shifted. Doorways appeared and vanished. The house did not like being seen directly for too long. By midnight, he became aware of a pattern. The house reacted to attention. When he focused on a specific window, condensation bloomed across the glass from the inside, forming irregular streaks that slid downward and vanished before reaching the sill. When he stepped back, the streak stopped. When he moved closer, the front door creaked inward by a few inches, though no sound accompanied the motion. At dawn, the house vanished as before. Payment arrived. With it came a second envelope, delivered electronically, containing a brief note reminding him not to approach the property. The wording suggested this was not a rule but a precaution. The fourth night, the neighborhood noticed. A porch light across the street flicked on and off repeatedly, triggered by motion sensors reacting to nothing visible. A dog 2 houses down barked until it was dragged inside, its noise cutting off abruptly. The man remained at his post, recording changes as the house arrived closer still, its front steps now resting on the concrete of the sidewalk. The house's proportions were wrong. Its second floor appeared too tall, its windows set at uneven heights that made the structure feel stretched. The siding bore shallow impressions, like handprints pressed from the inside, too many and too closely spaced to belong to a single body. The open upstairs window was wider now, and the darkness behind it seemed deeper than the night around it. He noticed that the house no longer vanished cleanly at dawn. Instead it thinned. Edges lost definition. The roof became translucent, showing nothing behind it. Finally, the structure collapsed inward without falling, folding into itself and disappearing, leaving behind deeper scars in the ground and a residue of dampness that did not dry. The fifth night, the house crossed the curb. It appeared partially in the street, its foundation ignoring physical boundaries. The asphalt beneath it cracked in fine, radiating lines, as if stressed by an impossible weight. The front door stood open now, revealing a hallway that extended far beyond the dimensions the house should allow. The walls inside were stained in long vertical lines that suggested repeated contact, bodies brushing past over and over, wearing grooves into the surface. The man felt watched in a way that did not depend on eyes. When he turned his back, the pressure increased. When he faced the house, it lessened, as if the structure preferred to be acknowledged. He resisted the urge to approach, focusing instead on the windows. Shapes moved behind them, not silhouettes but absences, places where the darkness seemed thinner, stretched around something passing through. A realization settled in with cold clarity. The house was not appearing. It was arriving. Each night, it moved closer because it was meant to reach something. The job was not to prevent that. It was to document it. The sixth night, the house stood fully in the street, blocking one lane. Its presence disrupted the air, causing distant lights to flicker. The open door yawned wider, the hallway inside now angled downward, descending at a shallow slope that suggested depth far greater than a 2-story home could contain. The interior walls bore markings that were not stains but impressions, layered over one another, as if the house remembered every form that had passed through it. The man's notes grew shorter. He struggled to maintain objectivity as physical symptoms emerged. Headaches, nosebleeds, a persistent sensation of standing too close to a drop. He noticed that the house's windows now reflected him inaccurately. His movements lagged. His posture slouched in the glass even when he stood straight. At one point, his reflection remained in place after he stepped aside, staring out from behind the warped pane. Dawn did not come cleanly that morning. The house resisted. It lingered, translucent but present, its outline etched against the brightening sky like a scar that refused to heal. When it finally vanished, it left behind not just flattened grass but a shallow depression in the road itself, as if the ground had been pressed inward and had not fully recovered. The final night came without warning. The message arrived earlier than usual, instructing him to observe as normal. When he reached the site, the house was already there, occupying the entire street, its bulk overwhelming the space. It loomed closer than ever, its facade inches from where he stood, close enough that he could see fine cracks in the paint filled with a dark, fibrous material that pulsed faintly. The door was open. The interior was no longer dark. It was wrong bright, illuminated by a flat, depthless glow that revealed too much at once. The hallway descended sharply now, walls crowded with impressions that suggested forms pressed outward, trying to escape rather than enter. The air smelled of damp earth and old breath. He understood then that the house was not moving toward him. It was aligning. Each night had brought it closer to a point in space, not to a person. He was standing on that point. The job had ensured he would be there when alignment completed. The house did not wait for dawn. It shifted forward, not stepping or sliding but overlapping the space he occupied. The sensation was not impact but enclosure, like being wrapped in architecture. The world narrowed to walls and angles that did not obey distance. The street, the sky, the neighborhood ceased to exist. There was only interior, folding endlessly inward. Records show that the lot remains empty during the day. At night, residents report a structure standing where it should not, closer each evening to the center of the street. New job listings appear occasionally, offering generous pay for simple observation. The instructions remain the same. The house is still arriving. No official record lists the man as missing. His name was quietly removed from payroll databases, his lease expired without renewal, and his phone continued to receive automated notifications long after it stopped being carried. To the systems that tracked him, he simply reached an endpoint. But the house did not lose him. It incorporated him. On the night after the alignment, the house did not vanish at dawn. Instead, it remained faintly present, a pressure in the air, a distortion in the light where the street should have been empty. Neighbors reported a headache-inducing shimmer and the feeling of walking past something tall and close without being able to see it. By midday, the sensation faded. By nightfall, the house returned fully, restored and closer to completion than ever. Inside, space no longer followed any recognizable geometry. The hallway that had once sloped downward now extended in multiple directions at once, a convergence of corridors folding into one another without junctions. The walls bore layers of impressions, not just of bodies but of moments. Fear had weight here. Memory left residue. Every surface carried the pressure of those who had entered and failed to leave. The man was present throughout the structure, though not intact. His awareness had been distributed, stretched thin across angles and corners. He did not experience time sequentially. Instead, he existed in accumulation, every second pressed atop the last without separation. The house fed on this continuity, using it to stabilize itself, to maintain coherence between nights. The purpose of the watchers became clear in retrospect. Each observer served as an anchor, a fixed point of attention that allowed the house to orient itself within the physical world. The job listings were not recruitment but calibration. The generous pay ensured compliance. The warnings were not meant to protect the watcher but to preserve the house's gradual approach. Night by night, the structure continued to advance. Residents began reporting that doors in their homes no longer led where they should. A hallway might stretch longer than its floor plan allowed. A closet might open onto a narrow stairwell descending into darkness before snapping back into coats and shelves when the light was switched on. These anomalies clustered around the street where the house appeared, radiating outward like cracks from an impact. The house was learning. Each intrusion into surrounding space taught it more about the rules it needed to bend. It practiced subtly at first, testing angles, distances, and thresholds. It discovered that walls remembered being walls, that doors preferred to open rather than resist. It exploited these tendencies, easing itself into gaps that reality did not guard closely. Inside the house, the man became aware of others. They were not individuals anymore, but patterns of presence embedded in the structure. Some were recent, their impressions sharp and reactive. Others were old, worn smooth by repetition. All had been watchers at some point. All had stood in the wrong place for too many nights. Their awareness had been harvested to thicken the house's interior, to give it depth beyond its external dimensions. The house did not kill. It archived. Each night, it extended itself further into the neighborhood. By the third night after alignment, it occupied the entire street, though only those closest could perceive it directly. Vehicles stalled when passing through its footprint. Streetlights dimmed and failed, their wiring unable to accommodate the altered space. The air grew heavy, carrying the scent of damp wood and something older, something that had never been outside. Authorities responded to complaints with routine inspections conducted during the day. They found nothing. The lot remained empty, the street intact, the houses aligned as expected. Reports were dismissed as stress, shared delusion, or the byproduct of urban decay. The house required darkness to assert itself fully, and it understood this limitation well. It adjusted its schedule. Instead of appearing suddenly, it began arriving gradually, bleeding into the world as the light faded. At twilight, outlines emerged like afterimages. By full dark, the structure was complete. This allowed it to maintain partial presence even as dawn approached, stretching its nights longer with each cycle. Inside, the man's awareness sharpened in brief, painful moments. He perceived the house's intention not as thought but as momentum. It was not malevolent. It was incomplete. It had existed for a long time in a state of near entry, brushing against reality without fully crossing. Watchers provided the final component it lacked: sustained observation. Attention shaped it. Fear stabilized it. Memory gave it mass. The house remembered every watcher because memory was the only thing it could not generate on its own. As weeks passed, the house reached the center of the development. Its influence widened. Entire rooms in nearby homes became inaccessible, their doors opening onto blank walls or unfamiliar interiors. People reported seeing reflections that lagged or behaved independently. Pets refused to enter certain spaces, bristling at empty air. The job listings continued to appear, always localized, always offering easy money for simple observation. New watchers arrived, standing at prescribed distances, anchoring the house's expansion. Some lasted a night. Some lasted longer. All were eventually absorbed, their awareness folded into the growing interior. The man's role evolved. He became a reference point within the structure, a primary layer upon which newer impressions settled. His fear had been intense, sustained, and detailed. It provided a rich framework. Through him, the house learned how humans perceived space, how they measured distance, how they oriented themselves using landmarks and boundaries. It used this knowledge to better mimic a home. The exterior changed accordingly. The house adopted features that suggested habitation. A porch light that glowed faintly without power, curtains that shifted though no wind touched them, a mailbox that appeared empty but always warm to the touch. These details increased its plausibility, reducing resistance from the surrounding environment. Reality accepted it more readily when it looked familiar. One night, the house did not vanish at all. It remained through dawn, its presence thin but undeniable. Those who looked directly at it felt vertigo, nausea, and an overwhelming urge to look away. The structure flickered, its edges unstable, but it held. By noon, it had faded enough to be ignored, but the ground beneath it remained altered, permanently depressed, as if bearing a load that had not fully lifted. This was the threshold the house had been approaching. With daylight access, even partial, it no longer depended entirely on watchers. It could sustain itself using the accumulated awareness embedded in its walls. The job listing slowed, then stopped. The house had enough. Inside, the man felt a change. The pressure of constant arrival eased. The structure settled into a more stable configuration. Corridors stopped rearranging themselves as often. The impressions on the walls deepened, becoming less reactive, more permanent. The house was no longer searching. It was remembering. The neighborhood adapted in small, desperate ways. Residents learned which routes to avoid at night, which rooms to keep locked, which reflections to ignore. Life continued around the absence at the center of the development, bending around it like water around a stone. Property values dropped. People moved away. New families arrived, unaware of what the empty lot became after dark. The house waited. It did not need to advance further. It had achieved a foothold. From here, it could persist indefinitely, sustained by memory and the occasional attention of those who noticed it and wondered. Curiosity alone was enough to feed it now. Fear was no longer required, though it remained abundant. The man existed as a constant awareness within the structure, no longer distinct but not erased. He understood, in the way one understands gravity after falling, that the house was not unique. It was one of many thresholds scattered thinly across the world, places where reality weakened under sustained observation. Most never reached completion. This one had been patient. Sometimes, late at night, when the neighborhood was quiet and the house was fully present, a figure could be seen standing across the street, facing the structure. Not a person, but the impression of one, formed from layered memories of watchers who had stood there before. The figure did not move. It did not need to. Its presence alone was enough to remind the house where it had come from. Records still show the lot as empty. Maps have not been updated. But at night, if someone stands at the right distance and watches long enough, the air thickens, angles blur, and a familiar shape begins to take form. The house remembers how to arrive. It remembers what to do with those who help it. The house is still there. It appears where attention lingers too long and fear fills the space left behind. If you want more true, unsettling horror stories that feel uncomfortably real, subscribe now. New stories arrive every night. And like the house, once you